The alien species themselves are one of, if not the most interesting part of Ben 10. While we only really get a glimpse of it, the world of the series feels so expansive. It really manages to feel like a living, breathing universe. Made all the more so when we get more information on Ben's transformations themselves. This comes in a myriad of different forms, but in Classic in particular, this comes with other members of the species popping up, like with Tetrax being another member of Diamond Head species, as well as all the background aliens we see pop up, particularly in the Secrets of the Omnitrix film, as well as the Vulcamancer's Phil releases from the Null Void. Though, let's put a pin in that, we'll circle back to Phil a bit later. What I'm getting at is just how much there is to all these aliens beyond being simply Omnitrix transformations. And one of the highlights of the series is exploring some of those aliens' homeworlds and cultures. From Alien Force onwards, and particularly in Omniverse, we start actually getting to explore some of those homeworlds reasonably in depth, like with the Nor-Transul, where Ghost Freak, Snero, Frankenstrike and Vampire species come from. All of those species, at least for the most part, living together really created this great mixing pot of alien species that all felt so cohesive, especially in their visuals and theming. As well as, and admittedly in less depth, we explore Ripjaw's homeworld, then we've got Galvan Prime being Azimuth and Grey Matter's homeworld. This is definitely the one we spend the most time on, not to mention Galvan's moon being where Upgrade species originates from. Then we get Big Chill's homeworld, not to mention Vilgaxia, not so surprisingly Vilgax's homeworld. There may be a handful more I'm forgetting here, and if so, please correct me, but those are what come to mind. And beyond just having a name and look to their homeworld, what I really like about it is we get to see members of these species living their lives, interacting with other members or our main cast, and generally the environment they've shaped or been shaped by. Otherwise, seeing species that just ooze with personality and background coming to Earth is always a real treat for me. The incursions and Tetramans really come to mind there, each of them having such a cohesive look to their species, their clothing, their spaceships, and their general philosophies are so compelling and interesting. Not to mention the dynamics between alien species, whether it's between the different forms of upchuck species bickering, the inhabitants of the Anor system having a somewhat tenuous relationship and ecosystem, or species from different planets being rivals or outright enemies, like with the cerebral crustaceans and Galvans, or with Wrath species and those little marshmallow guys. Before we get into it, if you like what I do here, please subscribe, I'd really appreciate it, but otherwise we'll get back into it. So there's an additional layer to that, the theme of this video, and one I and a lot of the community really have latched onto. We've got the predator species that hunt those Omnitrix aliens we've gotten so attached to, and our introduction to those predators as an audience is through a MacGuffin called the Nemetrix, a knockoff pseudo-omnitrix made through the combined efforts of Dr. Psychobos and malware. I think it should be noted that this device was made in, and I quote, mere weeks, which feels like it could have been improved given more time. It's like at the end of an exam if you've got extra time and you don't go back to look over your answers. And when we're first introduced to the device, it's used by the villain Khyber's dog Zed. It functioning similarly to the Omnitrix, only rather than turning the user into any regular alien species, it's only capable of transforming them into non-sapient beings. In theory, that's any non-sapient species, though seeing as the DNA gathered for the device entirely consists of predator species, the other applications of this device aren't really relevant in the context of the story. Going back to the idea behind the device itself, it's designed for Khyber based on an incomplete blueprint of the original Omnitrix, though it's gone through a few stages, but we'll touch on that later. The introduction of this device was a real shake-up in the series, coming into the show right from the start of Omniverse, feeling like I had an answer to most every one of Ben's transformations. And without directly having to tell you that, it really felt like there wasn't anything Ben could throw at it that wouldn't be countered, leaving you to initially wonder just how extensive that list of predator species is, and gets you as an audience member to sit down and consider what species could possibly hunt certain Omnitrix aliens. And while it turns out there's only 10 alien predators in the Nemetrix, the list of predators did feel pretty extensive, especially taking into consideration the production and thought behind each one. We've got bug lizards, stinkflies predator species, Crabdozer, who seems like the series staple, being Heat Blaster's predator, the Psylobed Terran for Big Chill, I don't think I pronounced that right, a Mucilator for Crashhopper, an Omniverosis for Grey Matter, or more accurately for Azimuth in particular, Slamworm for Armadillo, a Tarantula for Ballweevil species, keep this one in mind, we'll circle back to them later as well, and finally a Visotopus for Brainstorm species. Presumably there are more species that could have and should have been in there, and there is one I left out for the sake of a later reveal, but this handful gave the impression of a never-ending list of species, even if Crabdozer and Bug Lizard feel like they appear more often than not. And I don't know if it's stressed enough just how formidable these forms really are. They're tailor-made to hunt the species Ben uses. When asked about it, Derek J. Wyatt stated that even in their ultimate forms, it's possible that they could overcome their natural predator, but not probable. Meaning in most instances, you could presume they're unlikely to win against them, even as their ultimate forms. Circling back to Phil as promised, and if you haven't seen Omniverse, I assure you this is relevant. After being exiled to the Null Void, Phil was taken by Dr. Psychobos, Malware and Khyber and forced to be their trial run for the Nemetrix, being sent after Ben as a Terrorangela, and as you may expect, seeing as he didn't end up being the user of the device, the trial run went horribly wrong, seeing as a sapient user like a human can't handle the feedback of the Nemetrix. This always felt to me like a sapient mind functionally couldn't translate to a non-sapient species one. As a side effect of this, in his later appearances after having the Nemetrix removed, Phil's mind has been permanently affected and has given him the ability to enter a hybrid pterorantula form. In some sort of evolution or mutation of that species, Phil can now inexplicitly absorb and distribute electricity like a more subdued version of feedback. After that, the Nemetrix was fittingly given to a more suitable user in Zed, Khyber's dog. I didn't quite know where to insert this, but while watching the series, Zed's size seemed quite inconsistent. At times, her head is nearly as large as Ben's torso, but other times she's around the size of a medium to large dog. I always really liked the dynamic with Zed and Khyber, using it as a signal to transform between predator forms or revert to original one. This was later changed after Dr. Psychobos modified the Nemetrix further, giving Zed the ability to change forms at will. Though in Showdown, Zed was abandoned by Khyber before being saved and taken on by Kevin, who treats her as a pet rather than just a tool. Zed later being replaced by Khyber with a new Nemetrix user, and by a predator species itself in a Penuncian, functionally an alien saber-toothed tiger with the ability to self-duplicate, and fittingly so being the predator species of Ditto. There's not a lot to it. He found her and tamed her, having a similar relationship to her as he did with Zed, using her as a tool and a Nemetrix user. Though as a tool, this species is particularly more effective given their ability to duplicate, giving us the very fun concept of a Nemetrix user who can not only multiply, but each of their clones also had an independent Nemetrix, meaning each version could become a different predator species. We only see them in 1 or 2 appearances, but they really bring a certain sense of increasing danger to the series. And I haven't even gotten to the gimmick on top of the gimmick after entering the alliance with Albedo. Albedo upgrades the Nemetrix with the evolutionary function of the omnitrix, meaning that slim chance of an ultimate overwhelming the predator species is now entirely gone in sort of an evolutionary arms race of species. Though presumably down to production, we only see an ultimate form of her base species. And I do quite like this design. Feels very reminiscent of Ultimate Humongousaur with that sort of armoured head detail. Getting further into this video has really given me a new perspective on just how much story they get out of this device. It just keeps popping up throughout the series, each time coming in with new challenges and slowly improving or at least changing in new and interesting ways. And as such, let's get into the final iteration of this device with the addition of another gimmick in the form of the slimebiot named Skurd. If you're unfamiliar, slimebiots are a species of little guys who carry and distribute DNA. And when attached to someone, they can create and modify limbs being a sort of loose term here. Using the Nemetrix as a fun source of DNA and as a bargaining chip, Khyber gets Skurd over to his side, allowing him to access predator abilities without transforming and therefore without being corrupted by predator DNA. Though this doesn't last long and Skurd jumps ship over to the Omnitrix as a more interesting and far greater source of DNA. After having Skurd removed, Khyber's exposed to the predator DNA in a very similar vein to Phil before being restrained and having the device taken off of him. It's never shown, but you could reasonably assume that from there Khyber may go down a similar path to Phil, having his mind and genetics changed forever. I've seen some very talented artists out there give their take on a hybrid form or at least a future corrupted Khyber. Broadly speaking, there's so much here. I've covered the Nemetrix in part a number of times in previous videos, but I just really wanted to get into all things Nemetrix. It's such a compelling plot device and such a nice little match to the Omnitrix. It's handled so well, constantly being upgraded or handled differently as time goes by, without ever feeling like it strayed too far from its original purpose. Managing to persistently be a threat and answer to the Omnitrix transformations while still having enough risks to make it feel like it has setbacks. If you have any thoughts or feelings on the Nemetrix or anything I've said here, or if you want to comment on my mispronunciations of some of the predator species, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for watching.